Hello, everyone. I want to kind of make this a little series in my YouTube channel. It's called, Daily Conversations, right? So in these daily conversations, I'm pretty much going to be talking about anything that really I have in my heart and anything that has been going on in my life in regards to faith, right? And anything that I think that everybody can learn from. And as of late, there's a lot of things and a lot of pivotal moments that are going to change the kind of the course of my trajectory, but also the trajectory of many of my friends that are in regards to, situations in their career, situations in their school, and et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to talk about really rewiring our brain and how we see adversity, how we see uncertainty, how we see fear, because we all have those things from time to time. And, I want to talk about a little bit about those things you know, and a little bit of my story as well as an example to use as for this daily talk, daily conversation. And when I went on to my undergrad and when I went on to do my master's, I did my master's and my undergrad away from home. And with that, there was a lot of questions. And how am I going to pay for food? How am I going to ride to school? How am I going to sustain myself? Do I have the adequate skills to survive alone? First time out of the care of my parents. Do I have all of those things in set and in place in order for me to be able to succeed? And sometimes when we are taking up new opportunities, there's a lot of things that can come to our minds. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of fear that can be placed upon us by ourselves, by the enemy, and of course by other people's insecurities and by other people's inability to see themselves in that situation. And what do I mean by that is, like, you know what, if this person doesn't feel like they are capable of succeeding in those environments and in those opportunities, they will say something along the lines that, be careful, as they did with me. For example, when I was choosing my college, and when people found out that I was going to move out of Laredo, where I'm from, the Valley of Texas, and they said something along the lines of, well, people always leave, but they always come back because they don't make it. So things like that. That when, as a young kid, 18, 17-year-old, when you're trying to make it big and when you're trying to fight for a better life for your family, for a better opportunity, when you hear those things, especially from people that you think are supposed to be supporting you, it can be a little bit heavy and can be a little bit, disheartening. And, when we take up opportunities, more than likely, in some that require great sacrifice, there's going to be a lot more questions and answers. There's going to be a lot more uncertainty than, guarantees of success. And sometimes that uncertainty and that fear that comes from not knowing what's going to happen and how we are going to be able to succeed with that opportunity. Are we even capable of succeeding in that opportunity? It can be a little bit paralyzing, or it can paralyze us into not doing the things that we are supposed to be doing in order for us to move forward. I know, because it has happened with me. We think that we are not sufficient. Our skills are not up to par with other people, right? And our skills are not where they need to be in terms of, in terms to meet the requirements that you need, maybe for a job, for school, to get into med school, to get into PT school, to get into OT school, to get into law school, to get into your graduate psychiatry school, whatever the case may be, right? And those are questions that are valid, right? Because those are human. We are human, and there is more things that we do not know than things that we do know, right? We only see life with our point of view. We don't see what God is doing behind the scenes. But when I look back, I am very glad and very happy with myself that despite of me having more questions than answers, I was able to still take that leap of faith. And I was still had the courage and the strength, right, through God, to follow my dreams and to follow what God has called me to do, right? Because doors opened up miraculously for me when I, for example, when I did my master's. When you go to grad school, usually you take a little bit of time to write essays, to apply, to find letters of recommendation, to do all of these things that you need to get done prior to just even applying, right? And when the opportunity arose for me to do my thesis and to do my master's in the degree that I was in, it was in such a quick fashion that it did not allow me to think about it more than a typical student would, to make an educated decision. I'm not against making educated decisions, by the way. I'm just saying some opportunities by God, even when we think we are not ready for, God qualifies us and God gets us ready for those opportunities, right? And, when I accepted my master's, I had a lot of questions in my mind, right? Because my master's and the scholarship that was given to me, right? If I wanted it, I had to find letters of recommendation. I had to write essays. I had to apply to the school, and I had to get into the school all within a span of like maybe 2 weeks. And if you know, that's very hard to do, because in order for you to apply to grad school, it takes time. It takes, you got to take good care of your, the documents that you're sending over, the essays that you're writing, the recommendation letters. You have to give your teachers enough time to write those. So everything was just all jumbled up together. And again, this was the journey of God showing me that He is in control. Because now, for someone like me that likes to control everything, for someone like me that wants to control the outcome of everything, the outcome was not placed in my hands anymore. The outcome was placed on the hands of God, and only by the glory and by the grace of God was I going to be able to apply, get accepted. But before that, even get the recommendation letters on time. Before that, even write the essays on time. And, and outside of that, for me to be able to register for classes, right? Because I graduated in December, I needed to register for classes for next spring. So it was all in quick succession, and everything was not, and I couldn't do one thing if this thing didn't happen, if I couldn't continue to this phase of the application if this didn't happen. So everything was out of my control. But this was my journey to letting God have control, and for me to surrender the control that I had in my life onto Him. And sometimes when we take up on these decisions, that's what's going to end up happening. We're going to be placed in situations where God and only God is going to get us through. And that's something that I've learned with my own life. And and I remember God showing up in such a miraculous way that everything happened and everything was done within 2 weeks. But just because everything was done within 2 weeks and I was able to get everything ready, there was a huge high, right? Because, wow, I got into grad school, right? And it's a big accomplishment. I graduated from undergrad. I was having fun with my friends, and it hit me. It was like, whoa, okay, now I got into grad school, but how am I going to get to the other campus? I don't have a car, right? At this point, I didn't even have a license. Like, I knew how to drive, but I didn't have a license, so I had to get my license. And I didn't know anybody in the place where I was going to be going at. I didn't know if I was going to be able to have a place to stay at. I didn't know a lot of things. There was more questions again. Even after having that huge accomplishment of getting into grad school, there was a lot of questions. There was a lot more questions than answers, right? And there was a lot more no's, right? To the people outside of me, there was a lot more no's than yeses. And what I mean by that, there was more reasons for me not to accept that opportunity than there were reasons for me to actually accept that opportunity. So there was more reasons for me to say no than there were reasons for me to say yes, I will continue with my master's. But regardless of that, again, and in such a miraculous fashion, again, I had nothing in control of my hands. It was all up to God if he wanted me to go or not. God showed up for me. God opened the doors. And I was able to find a place. I was able to get my license. I was able to find a car. I was able to do all of these things again that can take a little bit of time for most people. I was able to do it in such a quick amount of time. And all the paychecks that I would receive from school, from my job at the lab, they were nothing short and nothing more than what I needed down to the cent, which is crazy. What I needed to pay for rent, that was my paycheck, right? But still, the questions, right? The fear of failure, the fear of what if this was the wrong decision? What if I listened wrong and God did not want me to go here? What if, I did what I was not supposed to be doing and I was supposed to go the other way? All of these questions were still in my mind. And, again, as faithful as God is, he knew that my character needed more work, right? And it's funny because I tell my friend this. When I moved on to my master's, graduating from my master's was not a worldly graduation for me. It was a spiritual graduation. Because when I went onto my master's, I went a non-Christian, and when I came back from my master's, I was a Christian. I had been baptized. I had given my life to the Lord, and it was a spiritual graduation for me. But of course, like any coursework, like any bachelor's, like any master's, there's going to be tough classes. So of course, there was days where I was questioning myself. Why am I here? There was days where I was questioning my abilities, right? Because, backtrack a little bit, I was a research assistant, so I was in the lab for a year. But then the next year, I was given the opportunity to teach, right? And not everybody gets the opportunity to teach. So when they presented me the opportunity, it gave me, I was like, glory to God, right? This is incredible. I did not feel like I was the best option. But, I had never done it before. I was scared. I was afraid. And truth is, I could have denied. I could have, I could have said no. They were not forcing me, right? The department. But regardless of that, I said yes. And I kind of said yes immediately. So I signed the contract. It's like, you know what? I'm going to teach. Let's do this. But what ended up happening was, since I was going to get paid a little bit more from the school, they ended up taking my scholarship away, right? Because I was, from their point of view, which is valid, the money should be enough to be able to pay for your classes and to be able to do all these things, which it would be the case, right, if I lived in the place there where I went for my master's. But that was not the case. And, it was... So when I accepted it and when I saw my student bill and I saw that my classes were still paid for, were not unpaid, now the reality set in. So now the questions and the fear of failure, the fear of not being able to live up to these standards, the fear of not being able to live up to what I needed to do in order for me to be a good teacher, in order for me to be a good student, all of those came rushing back again. So not only did I have to now worry about paying for my apartment so I won't be living in the streets, now I had to worry about paying for my classes as well. But it's funny. And God is a very intentional God. But because I accepted that teaching position, even though it took away the financial security, right? Now it was time for me to work on my character. because that teaching position helped me and pushed me to address that fear that I had and that I always carried of failure. Right? That fear and that controlling nature of being able to control every variable in order to get the desired outcome. There was no such thing as that in this case. There was nothing, in reality, there was nothing that I can control. I was in the mercy of God's hands. And looking back, there was a lot of nights where I cried. There was a lot of nights where I was hungry. There was a lot of nights where I missed my parents, and when I was afraid and ashamed to ask my parents for money because I didn't have money. And I didn't want them to worry. But outside of all that pain, physical, emotional, and spiritual pain that I felt, I was able to deconstruct everything that I was. I was able to deconstruct everything that I was able and that I saw myself able to do. Never once in my life did I think of myself as an instructor, as a teacher. And God knew, right? And God knows that where He's going to lead me to and what my purpose is, He's going to put me in situations where I have to break the mold and I have to step out of the box that I have placed over myself. I have done things that I have never thought of my life ever doing. No one in my life has ever done a master's. Never once in my life did I hear someone doing a master's when I was growing up. So God put me in a position where I was vulnerable. Not because He hates me. Not because He wanted to see me suffer. But I realize now that God puts me in a vulnerable situation where I was hungry, where I was, I didn't have really people to depend on emotionally. Because, I mean, you can call your parents and you can FaceTime them, but it's not the same as having them around you. He put me in such a vulnerable position where I had to let my guard down and I had to let God take care of me. And all of this to say, right, moral of the story, is that when you take the leap of faith and when God has placed a dream inside your heart, I want you to know that it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a walk in the park. It's not going to be something that, it's going to be like you're going to look back on as like, man, I didn't even try to do this. No, it's going to take courage. It's going to take resilience. It's going to take spiritual endurance. It's going to take physical endurance. There's going to be trials every single day. There's going to be questions that need to be answered that may not get the answers right away. Right? But it's going to be a beautiful thing to look back on because you're going to be able to see how much closer and how much aligned you have been with God since those moments. Because those moments, and when we take a huge leap of faith, it's like we jumping out of a mountain and we're just at the mercy of God to rescuing us. And that's how it felt. I felt like I had jumped off the cliff and there was a lot of clouds and there was nothing. I couldn't see the end, right? I couldn't see how deep it was or how high up I was from that mountain. But I just closed my eyes and I said, Lord, you carry me and you take me where I need to be. And while doing that, I was able to see things and I was able to extract things from my gifts and from my abilities that I thought I never had. So this is all to encourage you that, you know what, you may not feel adequate enough for the opportunities that are in front of you. You may not have all the answers. You may not have everything laid out perfectly. But who you do have is God. You do have the Holy Spirit right next to you and inside you, and you do have Jesus leading the way. And that's all you need. There is no failure. There is no missteps. And that's just something that I've learned and something that God placed in my heart and revealed to me was that there's no such thing as failure. Why? Because as Romans chapter 8 verse 28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Right? I like to kind of give the analogy of a GPS, right? Sometimes we're driving our car, we get off on the wrong exit, We miss the exit, right? But that does not mean that the GPS won't reroute you. So even when you feel like you're going to mess up, even like you feel like you're inadequate and you're going to ruin the opportunity, it does not matter. Take that leap of faith. Do not listen. Obviously, let me rephrase this before I actually say what I want to say. Do not listen to those negative thoughts that are limiting you and that are placing you in the box. Right? Because God, when you come to God, God is going to make you into a whole another human being. And I realize that now. The Brian that you see today is not the same Brian that you saw a year ago. And, you know, I just want to encourage you to take that leap of faith, play the game, and let God do what God does. He's going to take care of you. He's going to lead you. Things are going to get heavy. Things are going to get hard. You're going to cry. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to be happy. You're going to feel all of these emotions and you're going to have all of these questions. But at the perfect time, God is going to work in your heart. God is going to work on the deep-rooted issues that you have. And God is also going to lead you towards victory. And that's our promise. When we have Jesus, we already walk in victory. And it does not matter what circumstance we see in front of us and what we see with our own physical eyes. It does not matter. And that's the beautiful thing. And you know, when you look back, and when I look back, I want to be able to look back and to be able to be happy and to be able to be content with myself that, you know what, I might not be the strongest, I might not be the fastest, I might not be the smartest, I might not be the richest, I might not be the most intellectual human being in my field, but dang it, am I resilient? Dang it, am I, you know, like that piece that stuck to the sole of your shoe. I just don't give up. I never quit. I never let go. I never let go of God. And I want that to be one of my biggest qualities. And I hope that you want that to be one of your biggest qualities as well. It's for someone to look at you and it's like, you know what, that person, despite of everything that is presented in front of them, look at how they praise God. Look at how they worship God. Look at their resilience. Look at how they move and look at how they show up every single day, despite of everything being against them. Look at how they show up every single day. I want to be able to look back and say, you know what? I could have been a mess. I could have been a wreck. I could have messed up 1,000 times, but I kept showing up, and 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 I kept showing up. All right, so this is it, right? And thank you guys for joining in for Daily Conversation number 1.